Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whatever it might be in your time zone. It's a pleasure to see you again today. Welcome to We'll Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is March 7th, 2024, and we have another fascinating program for you, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, Natalie, why don't you give us the numbers today? As everybody knows, let me just backtrack here. As everybody knows, there is no charge for these programs. Rather, we ask that if you're able, that you make a donation to a food bank of your choice or of the one that the speaker has suggested. And since the spring of 2020, when Natalie founded this program, we have been, well, the money has been raised and people have been fed around the world. So Natalie, why don't you tell us today, what is it that is the amount of donations about which we've been told?
Thanks, Jean. Listen, thanks everybody for any donation that you can make, $1, $10. If you don't have that, maybe you can donate an hour of your time at your local food bank and help us out. But today our speakers are hoping that you will help the Hawaii Food Bank. They're going to tell us a little bit more about that. But to date, we have raised $533,147.08 to food banks worldwide, which is millions and millions and millions of people and meals that we've been able to serve. So to anyone and everyone who's made a donation, either with their time or their wallet, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. That's just fantastic. And on we go. And we have just so many great speakers that we have had and are continuing to have. And today is, of course, no exception. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our we have two speakers today. One is our own Chuck Crompton, who we have known for many years now, a Hawaii mediator. And I don't know if you do arbitration or not, Chuck, but a little bit, okay. Basically a peacemaker, and he lives in Hawaii. So he has a very, very strong interest in all of this. And then we have Andy Weiner, and he comes to us from Washington, D.C. He's a friend of Chuck's, and he is with the DC office of Strategies 360s, which is essentially a political consulting firm. And Andy is a political consultant, and an attorney, both for states and the federal government. And so how he comes into play with the topic today being the Maui fires that we all watched in horror on TV as this happened, for those of us who are not in Lahaina that day. There is a recovery fund, a one ohana, meaning one family, one home, a Maui Fire Victims Compensation Fund program for claims management and resolution. And Andy has all kinds of accolades, of course, and accomplishments to his name. I will just let you read those on the willworkforfood.news website and get right to this topic, which is so important and will be so interesting to us. So at this point then, Andy, Chuck, would you tell us a little bit about the food bank you've chosen today? And then the floor is yours. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you so much.
So I'll kick it off. The Hawaii Food Bank has been near and dear to my heart for many years. I'm very happy to see that that's one of the recipients, and I think Chuck will talk about the Maui specific fund. When I worked in the Senate for Senator Schatz for many years, the Hawaii Food Bank was one of the organizations that we worked very hard to get federal funding for over that period of time, and were successful in doing that. Senator Schatz was a former nonprofit head, and the nonprofit that he worked for was very much, they were sort of partners when it came to projects that they worked on. So I'm very happy to hear you supporting the Hawaii Food Bank. Thank you for anything that you can do, to support that invaluable program, which does just an amazing amount of of work to address food insecurity back in my home state of Hawaii. And then Chuck?
Just real quickly, I don't want to take any of Andy's time, but the Hawaii Community Foundation started almost immediately after the Maui fires, a Maui Strong Fund. I put the link in the chat. If you're so moved or you know people who might be, it's an extremely valuable fund, and all the money goes straight through to fire victims and recovery and rebuilding. The one other thing I wanted to say real quickly, I've known Andy for over 30 years, not only one of our top litigators and mediators and arbitrators, chief of staff for Senator Brian Schatz, who, as luck would have it, was my daughter's high school classmate. And there could not be a more perfect person to advise and counsel and guide the governor in building this Maui One Ohana Recovery Rebuilding Fund, not only for the victims, but for the community. And Andy will talk a little bit about a kind of a multi-door concept for multi-stage concept as well for this. Andy, what makes Lahaina different?
So Lahaina, for those of you who haven't spent much time in Hawaii, is a very unique place in Hawaiian history. Lahaina was the first recognized capital for the Kingdom of Hawaii in the 19th century. It was a whaling village and whaling port back at that point in time. And as time moved on, it moved into becoming a major sugar plantation town. And then in more recent years has become a home to a significant percent of Native Hawaiians. And then it's also a place, it's very much a working community. Lahaina is adjacent to two resort areas, Ka'anapali and Kapalua, and a large number of the residents of Lahaina, they live in Lahaina and they worked in those resorts. And so about 40% of the people that lived in Lahaina are Filipino, most of them that worked in the service industries. So it's an area that is actually somewhat remote from the main part of Maui. It's in West Maui. The county seat in Maui is Wailuku, and it's about a 45, 50-minute drive. And so it is a remote part of a neighbor island. And so that has created unique challenges in the response to the disaster. But hopefully that gives you a little bit of sense about the place, but very much intertwined with history of plantations, history of Hawaii. It's also the whaling capital, really, still to this date. And if you ever get a chance to get on a vessel and go out during the winter months, the whales that you'll see are unbelievable to witness in person. So that's that community.
Andy, you want to tell us about what you're doing?
Sure. Let me, so just by way of background, I think, I was a practicing lawyer in Hawaii for about 25 years, and I got into the bad habit of helping friends run for political office. The last campaign that I worked on before I moved up here was working for the Obama campaign back in 2007, 2008. And so after that was done, I moved up to DC. I worked at NOAA in the Department of Commerce for a few years. And one of the ways that I got involved in politics back in the 1990s was I was part of a program to recruit what was supposed to become the next generation of Hawaii political leaders. There were concerns about the number of politicians, frankly, that were going to jail in the 1990s. And so I was involved in recruiting 20-year-olds or early 30-year-olds who wanted to serve in state government. And among the folks that we recruited, Brian Schatz was a 24-year-old environmental organizer, and we got him to run for the state house in 1998. He got elected, and then in 2002, the two of us were looking for somebody to run in a seat on the Big Island in Kona, a seat that we had difficulty finding good candidates. And we came across this physician who had come to Hawaii as an AmeriCorps volunteer and was the only physician in an old sugar plantation town called Kau. which was, again, primarily Filipino and primarily Native Hawaiian. And this physician on his own was going door to door. He was very upset with the incumbent in his district who wasn't helping him with drug rehab services. And it was a very heavy ICE problem that was going on in that community. And that physician managed to get himself elected after having only lived in Hawaii for 3 years. And his name was Dr. Josh Green. And so Dr. Josh Green, fast forward 20 years, continues being a physician. He worked in the emergency room up until 2022 when he was still the lieutenant governor of Hawaii, but ended up winning terms in the state house, the state senate, became lieutenant governor in 2022. He became governor. And along the way, the two of us had become very close. Beyond just being a political advisor, I consider the governor to be one of my closest friends. The other thing about the governor and his family that's very interesting is that some of you that are involved in the alternative dispute resolution world and mediation in particular probably know a mediator by the name of Rick Green, who used to teach in Boston University. And Rick Green is Josh's uncle. 2 days after the fire happened, a couple of things happened to me. I was back in DC. The fire took place on a Wednesday. I sent a text to the governor. I told him, let me know if I can be helpful. And he sent me a text back on Friday and he told me, get to Hawaii. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? He goes, we'll figure it out when you get here, but I need you to get back here. And then he said, oh, by the way, my uncle has also been contacting me. He's concerned about what we're going to do with some of the victims of the fire. Could you just give him a call to find out what he wants to talk about? And so I called Rick, who I'd met when Josh was running for lieutenant governor and governor. Rick said, I know that this isn't the first thing that everybody's going to be thinking about, but in the not too distant future, you and the governor are going to need to start thinking about what are we going to do with the victims of this fire? How are you going to take care of the families that lost loved ones? How are you going to take care of people that lost their homes and lost their businesses? And how are you going to do that if it turns out that one or more of your utility companies are involved? And how do you do all of that to make sure that you do it in a way that is consistent with Hawaii's values and the way that Hawaii wants to see Hawaii governed? So I got on a plane and went back, did a whole bunch of things in the first week or so that I was there, continued talking to Rick and also to the governor. And about 8 or 9 days after the fire, the governor basically said, we need to find a way to take care of these families that have lost loved ones. I know that down the line that we're going to need to come up with a broader set of solutions that are going to deal with the rest of the claims that are going to come out of this fire. By then, it had become pretty clear that Hawaiian Electric was likely going to be the main party that was going to be considered at fault for the fire, but that there were others that were going to be considered at fault as well. And he asked if the governor asked me if I would begin to look at creating what we consider to be a humanitarian fund, which was a fund to compensate the families of those who had lost loved ones in the fire. And that's the genesis of the creation of what opened up on March 1st, last Friday, which is the One Ohana Fund, which is funded with $175 million. And which is now actively accepting applications for compensation for the families that did lose loved ones in that fire. That was the result of 6 months of incredibly hard work by a lot of people, including the governor. We were blessed to have Ken Feinberg and Camille Barros, who have worked on innumerable tragedies, 9/11, Agent Orange, the Pulse nightclub shooting, the Boston Marathon bombing, and the list went on. And as luck would have it, my office is all of about 2 miles away from where Ken's office is located in DC. And he couldn't have been more generous with his time. And so within a month after the fire, I was meeting with Ken and Camille, trying to think through what a fund might look like, trying to figure out what infrastructure you would need to set up a fund. And although I had mediated and arbitrated cases for a long time, this was clearly something I had never done before. And thanks to Ken and Camille, we've been introduced to financial professionals who are giving their time pro bono. We're working with law firms that are giving their time pro bono. And in the end, we have 6 contributing parties to the One Ohana Fund. It took some very hard negotiations and some very difficult conversations over time. But in the end, I think it's something that the governor of the state of Hawaii should be incredibly proud of, that we were able to do something like this within 6 months. I'm proud to report that after the first week, and we're just starting our outreach, we have of the 101 families that have lost loved ones in the fire, we already have 15 registrants who want to go through the process of applying for compensation through that fund. And if things go correctly, we will start providing compensation to them. We're hoping by late May or early June. The last thing I'll say about the program, and then I'm happy to answer questions or keep talking, is that the program is a voluntary program. It was very important to the governor, and we made very clear up front that not everybody might see the program as beneficial. There are some people that believe that they want to go through the litigation process. They want their day in court. They want to be able to confront the entities that they believe are responsible for the fire. And the message that we've given to all of them is that that is totally fine. What we wanted to do was to provide an option, one that might make sense to families, but for some families, maybe not. And the governor has taken a personal interest in this. He has been, to Maui innumerable times, but he's met with the victims' families now 4 or 5 times. And the fund administrator is a retired judge from the Big Island named Ronald Ibarra, who happens to be Filipino, who comes from a family that came to Hawaii to work on the sugar plantations. And he came to us and volunteered to give his time as well. And so the program is essentially staffed by individuals that are giving their time pro bono. It's involved, as I said, a fair amount of coordination because not every entity that was going to participate viewed the circumstances of the fire the same. It was difficult to pull people together at an early date, really before litigation has started to proceed. But overall, I think it's been well received back home. The governor, I think, is starting to receive, some accolades for, having done something this quickly, because in many of the states that have had wildfires, it's taken a number of years to set up the way that the program that we're setting up is going to work. And as I will finish with, we're looking at other opportunities down the line for alternative dispute resolution to deal with the remainder of the claims that are out there. But one of the side benefits, I think, from putting together this fund is that it's allowed relationships to form in a way that the participants in the fund, whether they're financial contributors or lawyers that are contributing their time, we viewed this very much, and Chuck talked a little bit about this, is that we viewed this from the viewpoint of wanting to come up with a uniquely Hawaiian or Hawaii solution to this problem. That there may be models that we can learn from the mainland, but Hawaii is such a unique place and our community is such a unique place that we felt it was important that we come up with a way to address what has happened in Lahaina in a way that's consistent with the values of the state and the people that live in that state. And so the One Ohana Fund is very much meant to be a reflection of those values. And we'll see how it goes as we implement it. But, I think for those of us who participated in it, it's something that I'll look back on, I think, as one of the proudest, things that I've ever had an opportunity to work on. There's a lot more I could talk about relating to the fund, but I'd also be happy to answer any questions.
And Andy, before we get to Hesha's and other questions, just quickly, there are 101 reported deaths and small number of serious injuries. There are over 5,000 residential and commercial properties reported as destroyed or seriously devastated. And insurance companies have already filed subrogation claims. They paid over $1 billion. Insurance companies, State Farm and others, actually came in with actual cash value policies and have been paying replacement value to settle claims. which is a good model. They took that initiative. So certainly the property damage claims, residential and commercial, and the business interruption claims for the commercial. And the big one is 5 to 10 billion. Who knows how big it's going to be? Who knows how many years? The community, because none of the victims' attorneys, property or personal injury, are representing the community. How do you deal with that? How does community representation and leadership come together to create a possible fund for planning, rebuilding, recovery, and allocation for that?
That's a really good question, and it's not an easy, it's not an easy set of solutions. And I mean, I think you have differing views and visions as to what should happen with Lahaina moving forward. And I think that that's going to take a bit of time to have those individuals that have divergent viewpoints be able to get together and figure out what they want to see for Lahaina moving forward. Because you have everybody from people that would like to see old Lahaina, if you want to call it that, turned into essentially a park and not get rebuilt on, to those who think we ought to be starting with construction relatively soon. And you have views that scan that whole spectrum. So trying to figure out how to bring them together is one of the things that we're working on. But some of the ideas that we're floating, that we're talking about now, is we're looking beyond the fund to compensate the wrongful death victims and those who suffered serious personal injuries. Is that some of the landowners who owned land that would be above the area where old Lahaina, or where Lahaina was, that community was up against the ocean. If you continue up the hill a bit, there's actually a swath of land that's about 1,000 acres of land. And that acreage is owned by 3 of the contributing parties to the settlement fund: the state of Hawaii, Kamehameha Schools, which is a Hawaiian trust, Native Hawaiian trust that's set up to educate children of Hawaiian descent, and also happens to be the largest private landowner in the state of Hawaii. And then there's a local developer who owns a company called West Maui Land. So with those 1,000 acres, one of the things that we're talking about through the alternative dispute resolution process is, could we take that land, which is zoned agriculture right now, and figure out a way to change the zoning in order to entitle the land, to put infrastructure in the land, and possibly to create a development of something that could be new Lahaina, where the lots that are being developed there, or the homes that are developed there, are used as part of an overall settlement. So it's a very sort of interesting idea that's sort of taking shape at this point. It's still at a very early stage, but I think that there's at least some thought that could be part of an overall solution. But that overall solution, as we've all learned in the interactions we've had with the people of Maui and in Lahaina in particular, it's got to be driven by the community. It cannot be anything that we basically impose. And so, as we are at least looking at those ideas, there are a number of groups, including the Hawaii Community Foundation, Chuck, that you identified, that are attempting to bring the community together so that they can hopefully reach something that looks like consensus, and that the alternative dispute resolution process and the resolution of legal challenges ends up being integrated within the overall view of what Lahaina should look like moving forward. So it's if you take a step back and think about it, that's a very complicated jigsaw puzzle to put together, but it's one that if we can figure out how to do, then I think we're going to end up with a solution that is uniquely something that's a byproduct of Hawaii and reflects our values. So it may take a little bit of time. It's going to take a lot of very skilled mediators and folks that know how to facilitate, to make it happen. But within all of the work that we're doing, there are kernels that you can see where this could all come together. I've told a couple of people in the last few weeks, like when I started this 6 months ago, I literally had no idea what a settlement might look like. Right now, I may not know exactly what it looks like, but I kind of feel like I see the border of the puzzle. And now it's like, where do the pieces go in? But I think that those of us who are working on it now have a sense as to like what those, what it will require in order for us to come up with a solution. It looks like there's some questions. Let me take a peek. see.
And then looking at the questions, one other to keep in mind, where are the resistance points, and how are you dealing with those?
So, I mean, we're getting resistance from some interesting places. I don't know how many of you follow what's going on back in Hawaii very much, but there's right now our legislature is in session. And you have to start by understanding that Maui itself only represents about 12% of the population of the state of Hawaii. And Lahaina represents maybe about less than right around 1%, let's say, of the entire population of the state of Hawaii lives in the west part of Maui. So with that sort of those small numbers, you're now seeing at the legislative level, you're seeing oversight of all of the funds that are now starting to flow into the emergency response on Maui. And you have legislators who are looking after their constituents who don't live in Maui, who are quite concerned about the amount of resources that are going to Maui. So you're having this very sort of interesting fight taking place right now where, the question is, how much more should we be putting into Maui? How much should the federal government be looked upon to do that? And so, as the legislature, I think, starts to, make it clear that they have some concerns, I think that's going to be one of the main friction points that I think that we're going to have to deal with over time. The other thing that's going on is that this is happening against a backdrop where this isn't the PG&E fire or one of the PG&E fires in Northern California. I think the thing that makes this more complicated is that this isn't a situation where you can just say, oh, Hawaiian Electric, you're the only one to blame. If you look at the lawsuits that are getting filed, Hawaiian Electric is disputing liability. There are issues about whether or not the landowners where the fire started, whether they were maintaining their lands properly or whether they created the conditions that led to the fire. So that brings into play Kamehameha Schools, the state of Hawaii, and that private land developer that I mentioned. The county of Maui has also been criticized to some degree about its response and whether or not it took precautions before the fire, because they had a similar fire back in 2018. And the question is, should they have done more since then? And then you have two additional utility companies, Charter Spectrum and Hawaiian Tel, who are being accused of putting too many pole attachments on the pole that fell over and caused the fire. So you've got these various parties that are there. And of course, those who are litigating the case are fighting tooth and nail over who's responsible for that fire. And Chuck, as a mediator, I think you understand that's one of the roles of a mediator. I mean, you're trying to assess who's responsible while you're trying to get a case settled. And this case is complicated. It's obviously got thousands of claims. You've got a number of different defendants, and you have finger pointing that's happening in the litigation context that's going to complicate things. Then the last thing I'll say, at least as far as the other complicating factor, is that you have plaintiffs' lawyers that frankly view the case differently. We have a number of plaintiffs' lawyers that have come in from the mainland who've had a lot of experience doing wildfire cases in California, in Oregon, in Colorado, and throughout the country. And they're very sophisticated, at least in terms of their knowledge of that fire litigation, but they're not necessarily terribly sensitive about Hawaii as a unique place with a unique culture. And so they have various views as to how the litigation should unfold, and they have views about the future of Hawaiian Electric and some of the other institutions in Hawaii that are potentially at odds with the people of Hawaii. And then you have local plaintiffs' lawyers who are much more grounded in the community, and they have somewhat different views as to the way that this litigation should be handled. So you have a collision of very talented people, some of them from Hawaii, rooted in Hawaii, understand the community, are going to be there after this fire is done. And then you have a lot of other people that maybe not as familiar with Hawaii or its history or its culture. And so that collision of people, that's one of the other factors that's out there that I would say is inhibiting, getting this thing over the finish line, quickly. I think it will take a little bit of time, to structure it.
And we got a bunch of questions in the chat box and we can take a look at those. One of them asked about the specific damage grid. I don't know if you want to get into that or maybe hold that off for later, or whether that's even been developed. But maybe if you explain the concept of the program, that will respond why that's not exactly what's involved here.
Yeah, the damage grid is definitely something that I view as like the next phase or two of settlement. Let me give you a little bit of background on how this particular fund has been set up. So I mentioned the contributing parties. Together, they contributed $175 million into what has now been set up as a trust fund, and we needed to set up an entity so that it could open up a bank account and accept funds. Those were all things that I needed to learn about, because when we were starting to get inquiries like, where do we send our $75 million? When Hawaiian Electric asked us that, it was like, oh my God, we need to set up an account. And thankfully, one of our local banks has stepped up to be helpful. And they said, well, you need an entity with an employer ID number and all of this. So back in December, we had to plunge into that and get that all sort of taken care of. So the fund is roughly divided into two pieces. We have $150 million that has been set aside for the wrongful death cases, and we have $25 million at this point that's been set aside for some categories of personal injury claims. For the wrongful death claims, what we basically have done, and this was based on advice we got from Ken Feinberg, is that we decided against doing against an individual analysis of each wrongful death claim. So it doesn't matter whether you were 7 or 97. If your heirs are going to make a claim, the amount that is set aside for each of the victims' families is $1.5 million. The way that the process works, and it's laid out, we have a website that is up and operational now that lays out sort of the flow chart. You need to go to probate court and get a personal representative appointed. We have to confirm that you indeed are the heir of somebody that did pass away in the fire. There's a very simple set of questions that have to be answered. We need to identify all of the potential claimants that may be making a claim for the $1.5 million. And then we have to then eventually get court approval for accepting those funds. We've been very, very fortunate that the state court judge over in Maui, Judge Cahill, was himself a plaintiff's lawyer when he was practicing, and I think is very sensitive to the needs of the community and has made it clear that he's going to do everything in his power to expedite processing of those claims. And so I've sort of smashed down what is about a 22-step process. As I said, we have a long spreadsheet and flow sheet. And thanks to Ken Feinberg, Price Waterhouse, PwC, they're the ones who built the website. They're the ones that are like looking at all of the submissions. They are advising the trustee or the fund administrator, Judge Ibarra. So Judge Ibarra is able to spend his time talking to victims' families and answering their questions before they decide whether or not they're interested in applying for the fund. And then when you go through that 22-step process, and if everything is certified, then the personal representative will receive a check for $1.5 million. There is a release for all of the parties that contributed. So that is one aspect of this that does require some decision making. And we've set up a panel of pro bono lawyers who will be helping with probate, and a separate panel that is going to be helping review releases who are more experienced in personal injury law. If all of this goes as well as we hope it does, we believe the first checks will probably go out sometime in late May or early June. We will accept applications until the end of April. I think that there's probably going to be some incentive for us to keep it open a little bit longer. We really do want to give people the option and give them an opportunity if they're interested. So we may keep it open a little bit longer. So that's the wrongful death track. For the personal injury claims, the thing that made those complicated, and actually in many ways much more complicated than the wrongful death cases, because up until a few weeks ago, we thought there were 100 of them, and then they were able to identify one last victim, and we suspect there are maybe 2 more. So I think by the time they're done, there'll be 103. But with the injury claims, what we were looking for, the categories that we set up for this fund were those who were hospitalized as a result of their injuries and those who sought medical treatment within the first 48 hours. Part of the difficulty is that that universe is far less defined. We don't know if that grouping is 20 or 30 or 250 or 300. We suspect it's actually on the lower side. We think that the number of individuals that were hospitalized is less than 25, but we're not entirely sure. And as far as those who were able to get medical attention in the first 48 hours, there was not only a fire in Lahaina, but upcountry in Maui, there's an area called Kula that also burned, and there were some individuals that also got injured up there. So what we're going to do is that we're going to wait and see how many people apply, confirm that they're eligible, that they were hurt as a result of the fire, and then Judge Ibarra, the fund administrator, is going to come up with essentially a grid that will say if you were in the hospital for 1 to 4 days, you get this amount of money, 5 to 8 days, this amount of money, and then there'll be probably a separate category if it was medical treatment and that was it. And so that's sort of the first 2 tranches of funding. If there's money left over, then there's 2 things that could happen. I believe all the fund contributors would like to take those funds and roll it into another fund and perhaps use the next fund to compensate other individuals who sought medical treatment and suffered personal injuries over a longer period of time. And when we reach that point in time, I think it's likely that we're going to start bringing in mediators like Chuck, because I think at that point there will probably be a range that's available, and we'll probably look to some pro bono mediators to take that pool of funds and to hopefully settle as many claims as are possible, so that we can start to work those claims down to a manageable number. So this particular fund and maybe the next one are focused on sort of the wrongful death, the personal injury claims. The bigger category of subrogation, property damage, business interruption, and the other category that I think we are all concerned about, which is the long-term emotional and physical injuries that might arise out of this tragedy. Those we're going to have to figure out, and they're going to be that's going to be a much more complicated puzzle. This was pretty complicated. The next one's going to be even far more complicated in order to make it work. So that's generally the way that the fund is operating. As I said, we opened up on Friday. By Monday, we had our first few registrants, and when I opened up the portal last night, there were 3 more that applied yesterday. So they're definitely trickling in. We know that potential plaintiffs are talking to their lawyers right now, and we expect over the next 2 weeks to see, more than a few more applications coming in.
So how does your work interface with litigation?
So the lawyers, interestingly enough, by and large, the lawyers that have been working on the creation of the fund are not the ones, their firms may be involved in the litigation, but the team of lawyers that's worked on developing the funds, they're not the same lawyers. We're very cognizant of what's going on with the litigation right now. The thing that's going on, that there was a story in our local online newspaper or online publication today. The thing that's been happening, there's been a fight over jurisdiction over the last few months. The defendants removed the cases to federal court. There was a motion to remand that got argued yesterday before a federal judge in Honolulu. And then I think that if you were going to take bets, I would place a bet on the cases are going to get remanded back to Maui State Circuit Court, which means that you're going to have one judge likely overseeing hundreds, if not thousands, of cases eventually. And so the interface with the litigation is that, as of now at least, I think what it's demonstrating to victims' families is something that the governor was extremely concerned about early on, is that this process could literally take years and years and years and years. And so, that process, he viewed as something that could be an impediment to healing for some of these families, and why he wanted to give them an opportunity to do something that would be quicker. But I think in the longer run, Chuck, I think for the next couple of funds, if you will, that need to be created, what happens as a result of the litigation will be, I think, extremely important in influencing what happens with the ability to come up with a creative solution to the rest of the claims that are out there. For example, Maui County is clearly going to be involved in the litigation. They're a defendant, but they also have their own claims. They're claiming that as a result of Hawaiian Electric's negligence, it damaged their infrastructure, and they're making a claim. But to the extent that they're a defendant, they're not a particularly wealthy county. They have a $10 million insurance policy, and that's essentially what they have. Then you look at Kamehameha Schools, which is the land where the fire started. And they may not have, in terms of like the rank order of liability, they may be down the list, but they also happen to be a $14 billion entity with literally billions of dollars of insurance coverage. And Hawaii has joint and several liability laws that might end up causing them to have to evaluate what they're going to do in settlement. So it's the work that Chuck, you and I are used to doing as mediators. But the litigation process, I think, is going to shape the way that some of those parties end up looking at how they're going to respond to requests for them to participate in some of these other settlement funds that are going to get set up. So, I think in a number of respects, what's happening early on with the litigation is going to be a reflection of what's going to happen long term. These cases are going to take a very long time. And on top of that, you have some parties that are well heeled that are going to have to make some very interesting and difficult decisions down the line. And I think those dynamics are going to end up affecting whether or not these cases end up getting resolved and when they get resolved.
So that kind of leads into another really, really hard question. And that is there any way, recognizing that the individual victims' attorneys do not represent the community, in fact, they're competing against the community for funds, is there any way to coordinate and make collaborative the individual recovery and rebuilding and the community recovery and rebuilding?
I mean, I think the answer is eventually, Chuck, has got to be yes. I mean, I think that, to the degree that we're going to settle property damage claims down the line, that has to be with the community, because part of what's going to end up being decided in those settlements is what is going to happen. Are the victims who lost homes, are they going to be given enough resources to go back into the areas that, their property? Are they going to go back in and rebuild there? Or is it going to be a brownfield where it's you can't even do that, or something in between? And so, figuring out where people are going to live is very much part and parcel, I think, of trying to figure out what's an appropriate solution. And so I think that to the extent that some of the lawyers that are in the case view this as a pure litigation matter with a litigation set of solutions, I tend to view that as being a very myopic way of looking at this, and I think is not likely going to. There are some of these claims that are not going to get settled if all we're doing is looking at, okay, we have to build this amount of cash to pay off this many victims, because you have within that list of victims, we know that there's 553 of them that lost their homes that they lived in. And what are we going to do about them? And what are we going to do about the 1,800 landowners that had homes or apartments or whatever else they had there? What about people that ran businesses? Are we going to let them go back into Lahaina to rebuild those businesses? And I think if you're not answering those questions, for some of these, for some of the victims, you can throw as much money as you want at them, but it's not going to result in settlements. And so the people that are going to come in to mediate and facilitate this, if they're not thinking about community as part of this, I think they're going to end up like not being able to get this situation in a place where we can come up with a unified vision on what settlement in the future of Lahaina should actually look like.
Wow. So based on the last 6 months, what do you see as some of the major, really difficult, challenging factors in that community rebuilding restoration vision?
So for those of you who haven't spent time in Hawaii or not familiar with Hawaiian history, what one of the main sort of factors that is out there is that Hawaii, up until 1893, was an independent nation. It was the Kingdom of Hawaii. And with some assistance from the US government, the Hawaiian Kingdom was overthrown in 1893, and Hawaii was essentially annexed in 1898. And the impacts of what the interactions are between the US and the Kingdom of Hawaii and Native Hawaiians has been, a tragedy in many ways of epic proportion. The number of Native Hawaiians who, had their language and their culture and their religion and their dignity stripped away is immense. And if you don't understand that history in some way, then you're not going to understand why it is that you have Native Hawaiians who are steadfast in protesting against any decision that might result in redeveloping Lahaina. They view that land as being stolen, and they view what happened to Lahaina as a byproduct, essentially, of imperialism from the US government. And if you don't have sort of that understanding, it's going to make it very, very difficult, to try to figure out how do we communicate with those groups of Native Hawaiians? How do we deal with their anger? So you have to have, that sort of background and understanding. Then you have a different community, the Filipino community. Most of them are first generation immigrants. They came to the United States looking for opportunity. They're working 2 and 3 and 4 jobs in order to keep their families both in the US and in the Philippines alive. And they want to be able to go back to work by and large. And so they want to see the community come back because from an economic standpoint, they need those livelihoods in order, to be able to survive. So you have those two competing cultures. Just start with that. And then I could layer on, Chuck, you and I could sit here probably for a couple of hours and layer on some of the other complexities. But if you just start with those two complexities, that might give you a sense of sort of the thorny set of issues that those who are going to try to mediate or facilitate are going to come right up against. And so if you don't understand that and you're not willing to listen and take those concerns on, you're going to come up short, I think.
And that points to an area, one of the questions was kind of what roles, what kind of qualifications, experience, orientations do you see in neutrals coming in to assist these processes, moving the needle from adversarial partisan to collaborative cooperative, particularly between individuals and the community?
I think it's essential, Chuck, that there be facilitators and mediators that come from the community that are recognized in Hawaii, that reflect sort of the diverse culture and diverse history of the state of Hawaii, that are able to talk with community. Fortunately, you're starting to see those types of individuals stepping up and emerging, and those skill sets emerging. We clearly need people that are skilled mediators who understand the legal system and the court system. The economic side, which we've not even really touched on, as to what it's going to take, for Hawaiian Electric or an electric utility to survive. We haven't even talked about that. And that's a whole other set of sort of complex business and financing mechanisms. So some people have to have a grip on some of that. We have to have people that have some understanding as to from a resources standpoint, what may be available from the federal government or the state government. So, you're going to need probably a team of people that have sort of different skill sets. At its core, though, we need people that I think, at least as to the future of the community, are rooted in the community, that understand the community. And that was a tight-knit group. I mean, this is a relatively small place and people know each other. And having some number of alternative dispute resolutions, whether they're professionals or whether culturally they're trained to do this kind of work. We need them involved, because if we don't understand those things, as I was saying earlier, I question whether or not we're going to be able to get to a resolution. So it's a mosaic. It's a mosaic of different skills, and it's going to take, I think, a fair amount of time for those. Not a fair amount. I think those people are going to end up having to listen to each other. I've learned a lot over the last 6 months from a lot of different people, and I think it's been, watching that come together has been one of the satisfying parts of the work. But I think that for the next couple of phases, it's going to take even more to get us there.
And I think all of you now get a sense, and I have to admit, I get pretty choked up seeing what Andy is doing and the amazing work of true art that this is to bring this together. He is a multimedia artist of the ultimate combination of relationship networks, abilities, all of those things. Having Eric Green available, one of the best anywhere at this, is a resource. There are others who have offered and volunteered input, thoughts, suggestions, time. So the dispute resolution community, I think, is a tremendously valuable resource. And Andy's exactly the right person to develop an understanding of how and who and what elements of that might contribute the most value. And Nellie, Jean, you want to just throw it open for questions at this point? We have 8-10 minutes left.
Yeah, sure. That would be great. One comment I had, thank you, aside from the thank you so much, this is fascinating. And I love going to Lahaina, and look forward to being able to go back and for those people to be taken care of and everything that's ahead of you. We here at Will Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour, we're privileged and honored to have Ken Feinberg be a speaker. And I looked it up while you were talking. He spoke on March 16th of last year. So just about a year ago. So for anybody who might be interested in looking ahead at what Andy's talking about, to what might end up, being in play, you might check that out, or else the movie Worth on Netflix. This is what Andy is doing here, and how you make these things happen. So thank you so much. So questions, do we have any questions here? We have a great opportunity to talk to some. Okay, no, let's see. Well, go ahead, Andy.
Somebody asked about, are we going to be looking for mediators and ADR professionals to assist? And I think down the line, the answer is yes. Chuck and I have talked a little bit about this, and I just think, given the unique nature of this particular fund, we didn't need a panel of mediators. There are categories of cases, though, that we're going to need mediators. And so, down the line, finding people that are willing to do this, Chuck, I don't know if you want to put in a plug for the Mediation Center of the Pacific, but, Tracy Wilkin, and I think her organization down the line, are definitely going to be involved in providing, the skills that we need to move forward. Because it's going to take, if you're looking at just the sheer number of claims that are out there, at some point we're going to need to bring in, I think, an army of people to help resolve these cases.
Well, just the subrogation cases alone. I know at my former firm, we defended these, as they called it, wildland fire cases. And, the homeowner carrier, or the property insurance carrier for a commercial property, they take care of their insured. And then they file the lawsuit to go back against whoever the alleged negligent or culpable parties would be. And those cases can drag on for a long time.
There's 144 separate insurance companies that are part of the subrogation claim.
Wow.
And then they have brought claims against 6 or 7 defendants. So it's a very complicated puzzle. So I see here is how are you communicating, educating, handling the expectations of the community is what the fund can do for them, what the legal system can do for them, and what is healing and what that entails. So I can talk a little bit about like what the fund is doing. Judge Ibarra asked for, and we provided him. There were some community engagement groups in Maui that volunteered to assist him because he's not from Maui, and they have been absolutely instrumental in opening up doors for him to be able to talk to victims' families about what the program is, and he's also spoken to the Maui County Bar Association, the plaintiffs' bar, the plaintiffs' lawyers as a whole. He's going to be doing outreach to the county council on Maui. He's looking for almost any opportunity that he can to talk about the program. And as I mentioned earlier, the governor himself has been very active with this as well. He's been to numerous meetings over in Maui, meeting with victims' families, and also publicizing it both locally and last night on NBC News. We were the lead story, and the governor was the lead story talking about this program. So this is something that is near and dear to his heart. I think it's very much a part of him being a physician before he is a politician. And when you watch him interact with some of these victims' families, it's the skill set of an emergency room doctor who worked in a rural health clinic for 10 or 12 years. That's his background. And so I think that the governor has been, one of the main people that's been out there communicating about this as well. So that's, I would say, from the fund perspective, what it is that we've been trying to do. And I think we're going to look for other opportunities over the next month or two. As I mentioned, April 30th is the deadline for at least the first set of applications. And we want to make sure that if nothing else, people have a chance to look at this and then decide, is this best for my family? That's the thing that we're going to try to get at.
Then this is very timely here today with these other deadlines coming up. We are approaching the top of the hour now, and I just thought that I would read one of the kudos and congratulation notes that's in the chat to you. People are very grateful. One of the comments, really impressed. Thank you for your skills, training, and for working your relationships for the greater good. Touching that it is such a relationship-based and community-rooted effort. Seems that you are uniquely positioned to help. Nicely done. And on that note, I think that everybody's comments are just so nice to hear, and they're all along these same lines. So thank you so much for what you're doing for the people of Hawaii, for what you've done for our country, and for being here today. Thank you again.
Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Natalie. It was also good getting to talk with all of you, and keep an eye out for this thing. I have great hopes that in a couple of months we'll be able to report some pretty good successes. So thanks for having me.
We will. Thank you again so much, and thank you all for being here. Same time, same place next week. We'll see you, and we'll be on convening mediations next week. So thank you, thank you, thank you.